The clearing held its breath as evening thinned to silver. On a wide blue blanket, Hannah lay still, her ribs rising in controlled rhythm beneath a small, spotted weight. Pip slept against her sternum, each purr a soft vibration inside the hush. At the edge of the grass, Rusty materialized from shadow, a gaunt geometry of ribs and sinew, eyes bright as wet amber. The air felt threaded with invisible wire. Ants traced quick roots across the blanket's hem. A breeze parted grass blades with surgical calm, revealing claw tips like tiny sickles. Hannah's pulse pressed upward, measured against the kitten's warmth. Rusty's whiskers tested scent and intention, her breath the faintest cloud. No leaves crackled, no birds called, only the low engine of a kitten's trust and the slow approach of a mother deciding what the living must defend. Clouds drifted over a chalk-white moon, diluting shadows into thinner ghosts. Hannah kept the posture of a fallen statue, careful not to tighten against the weight curled beneath her hands. Pip's ear flicked once, settling back into sleep. Rusty held position, a hinge of muscle ready to spring or turn away. The blanket's blue burned softly against damp grass, a beacon laid on the earth. Somewhere beyond the fence, a truck downshifted into distance, dragging the sound like a chain. The clearing tasted of metal and clover. Hannah measured each breath, smoothing fear into the indifferent rhythm of wind. A moth bumped her sleeve and vanished. Rusty lowered her head a fraction, drawing one claw across soil. The night waited, patient as stone. The decision did not arrive. It grew, inch by inch, inside the space between pulse and purr. Metal shrieked when Dave Martinez levered the barn's warped door, releasing a stench of ammonia and rot into morning air. Dust rained through a sunshaft, bright as powdered glass. In the far corner, a cage waited, its bars furred with rust, floor slicked with filth. Inside, a mother bobcat crouched so low she seemed a mistake in the shadows. Beside her, two small forms lay folded into silence, all spots and no movement. A third kitten quivered, ribs like bird bones, eyes barely open. The mother did not snarl, she did not rise. Her gaze traveled past humans, past noise, toward a place that did not exist anymore. The hinge clicked. The door opened. She pressed herself deeper into metal's cold geometry. There are silences that trap sound, silences that swallow choice. In that barn, both were present, thick as oil. Some predators looked back with fire, this one looked through. When the catch pole hovered, Rusty folded tighter, as if her skeleton had learned a second shape. No claws flashed, no teeth bared. The refusal was quieter than any obedience. Dave's hands worked slowly, voice kept somewhere inside his chest, but the mother was already not there. The body shook on a frequency that did not disturb the air. Light parsed her fur into ruined rosettes. The alive kitten trembled toward her belly and found only bone and vacancy. Outside, early sun brightened weeds along the fence, gilding neglect. The cage door opened to a carrier lined with folded towels. Rusty entered because the walls moved and the world permitted nothing else. The dead did not come. The living did, as weight and consequence. The barn settled back into dust.
The sanctuary's enclosure held a stream that stitched bright music through grass and stone. Rhododendron clustered dense at the border, making a tunnel of green secrecy. Rusty vanished into it, a ripple devoured by shade. Pip's cry traveled the clearing, thin as thread, catching on leaves and wood. A bowl of meat gleamed near water, untouched. The stream skipped and grinned over pebbles, indifferent to grief. Staff watched from the path, hopeful as habit, careful as professionals. Pip blinked toward the thicket, pupils wide, whiskers trembling. He wobbled 2 steps, lost courage, and folded into himself beside a mossed root. The mother's scent drifted, close then gone, like smoke refusing a room. Afternoon tilted light across the grass. Nothing approached. The bowl retained its shape. The stream kept moving. The smallest heart beat on, without an answer. Plans were stacked and set aside. Traps, lures, sedatives, all the vocabulary of control waited in a locked shed. Hannah chose subtraction. She would bring no tools, no food, no voice that could bruise the air. Only a blue blanket, a length of sky she could place on the ground and lie upon like a promise with a pulse. Staff adjusted schedules and expectations, becoming peripheral to an experiment built from patience and exposure. The rules were simple enough to misunderstand. The human would not pursue. The mother would not be cornered. The child would decide if the body was a bridge. The blanket spread like a lake under the day. Hannah lowered herself until her shoulder found earth. In a world organized by force, she invested in absence, inviting something wounded to arrive by its own direction.
Sun climbed and softened, dragging time like a net across the clearing. Entrails took shape and dissolved. A vulture wrote slow circles far above, indifferent punctuation and a pale sentence of sky. Hannah lay on her side, spine warm, cheek cooled by grass. Pip watched from the thicket's mouth, torn between gravity and curiosity, a small pendulum mid-swing. Rusty did not appear. The stream rehearsed the same handful of notes, unchanged. Sweat chalked Hannah's hairline, then cooled, then returned in a new place. A deer crossed beyond the fence line, turned its head, moved on. The blue blanket kept its color, an honest patch of summer on the ground. When shadows tilted long, Pip retreated, defeated by nothing and everything. The day ended without a decision, which was a decision all the same. Patterns become invitations. By the 4th morning, Pip recognized the lake of fabric and the mountain of warmth rising gently from its center. He climbed the slope in stops and starts, claws dimpling cotton, tail a crooked metronome of courage. Hannah felt the approach like weather, a climate shifting inside ribs and skin. The kitten reached the cliff of her sternum and folded there, needing a rhythm older than choice. Purr rose, steady and absurdly loud for such a small machine. Grass breathed around them. Far within the thicket, something adjusted weight. Rusty's scent drew a line through the air, cutting the space between safety and threat into measurable segments. Pip slept. Hannah's fingers found stillness against her own forearm. The blue blanket cooled beneath thin clouds. Some bonds are stitched in silence, surface tension holding a body and a world.
Dusk burned into a color that did not have a name, draining warmth from leaves while gifting them shine. Between branches, 2 orbs hovered, reflective and patient, lanterns set at predator height. Rusty did not step forward, did not retreat. She measured the improbable silhouette of a human lying prone while her child slept at its center. Pip shifted and resettled, a blanket within a blanket, one heartbeat braided to another. The stream quieted as if sound feared interruption. Hannah took air into the shallow pocket beneath Pip's curled weight and let it out with care. Night organized itself around the gaze in the brush. Something decided there, not a verdict but a procedure. The mother leaned into the dark and kept watching, building a map from this strange island of warmth and the little life it allowed to rest. Storm cells marched over the ridge with military precision, hammering the clearing into a wet astonishment. Rain struck the blanket, soaking its blue into deeper ocean. Pip trembled against Hannah's collarbone, tiny muscles firing like signals sent in code. Lightning tore open the thicket and welded Rusty's outline into brightness. Every rib counted, every whisker lit like wire. Thunder chased close, flattening time.
Hannah absorbed the water's weight, letting cold rearrange her awareness until it included only breath, fur, and the hard ground beneath kindness. Rusty held to the edge, eyes shining with storm fire, the instinct to flee braided tight to the instinct to watch. Between lightning's lashes, darkness returned with velvet finality. Rain drummed a verdict no one could read. The storm moved on. The clearing remembered how to breathe. The kitten slept through both.
The day sharpened without warning. Rusty left the thicket like a thrown shadow, all angle and velocity, a line pointed at the warm center of the blue lake. Soil lifted under her forepaws, claws quilting air in a pattern that explained how distance dissolves. Hannah did not alter shape. Pip's ear flickered, then stilled. A fractional halt arrested the momentum, a calculation mapped across Rusty's shoulders. She stopped with inches unspent, breath scoring the space over Hannah's face. The clearing resumed its geometry. A leaf settled beside a paw print. Heat traveled out of the ground and vanished into weather. Rusty lowered, pivoted, and folded back into green like breath returned to lungs. The gap remained, measured now and memorized. Boundaries once invisible had become visible, and because of that, more dangerous and more possible. The clearing held the echo of momentum the way a bell holds sound, ringing without noise. Pip clambered closer into the hollow of Hannah's throat, trusting what had not changed. The blue fabric kept a darkened halo where rainwater had pooled and stopped. Far away, a chainsaw started and died, leaving the world too large for its own silence. Hannah's muscles recorded the near impact in their fibers, tiny tremors untangling one by one. Not all fear is a refusal. Some fear is an honest inventory. The mother was somewhere inside the foliage, bones like hinged decisions, attention raked across possibilities. Birds resumed tentative arithmetic in the canopy. A beetle explored the seam where cotton met earth. The sun returned as if it had not left at all. Pip's purr restarted, smaller, resolving into a frequency the body could forgive.
Hannah placed a shallow bowl near the border, the meat bright with cold shine. She retreated to the blanket and became furniture again. Rusty ghosted forward with the precision of a roomer, nostrils testing the air, shoulders carrying the memory of cages. She examined the gift as if measuring the price hidden under scent. Then she lifted a paw and inverted the bowl with a neat violence, rolling meat into dirt and grass until the food had learned something about failure. The stream bore the sound away, unbitten. The bowl lay open-mouthed and useless, a small metal skull. Pip watched, eyes dark coins beneath a worried brow. The gesture registered as verdict and ritual both. Hannah accepted it into the archive of attempts. Some refusals clear a path, some refusals build a wall so a bridge knows what to reach. Days narrowed into brittle slivers, hunger writing shaky cursive along Pip's spine. Formula sustained but did not lift. The small engine sputtered under perfect sky. Breath came shallow, then shallower, a bellows losing argument to air. The blanket felt too large for the weight it carried. Rusty's scent moved at the edge, constant as weather, useless as weather. Hannah memorized the rhythm of weakness the way sailors memorize currents, because knowledge is a kind of mercy, even when it cannot change the tide. A fly traced a circle and stopped. Pip's paws fluttered once, paws of a dreamer trying to run inside a locked room. The stream sounded farther away. Color drained out of afternoon. Survival is not a story. It is a math problem with numbers that refuse to add. The equation leaned toward zero.
Pain contains mirrors. In the weakening of a small body, Hannah's memory unfolded with the steadiness of a hand opening to reveal a paper cut that never closed. Hospital light without temperature, a cradle without weight, a name that stayed in the mouth when it had nowhere to go. She did not weep, That river had already passed through and carved its canyons. Instead, she counted Pip's breaths, small fractions that still equaled something living. The clearing did not know any of this. It cataloged only light and movement, the exact number of midges above the stream, the tilt of leaves receiving wind. Rusty watched from shade, learning a human stillness was not always a cage. Grief laced the air without scent, altering choices without announcing itself. The heart adjusted again, heavier but more precise. Risk changed shape and became necessity. Hannah gathered Pip with the care used for fragile instruments and placed him near the rhododendron's mouth, a radius drawn to include the mother's shadow. Then she retreated to the blue lake and returned to stone. The kitten's breathing made a moth's sound, small and repetitive. Rusty's outline thickened in the leaves, reduced by fear, enlarged by obligation. She angled away instead of closer, a refusal carved by memory more than instinct. Pip did not cry. He made a small suggestion toward sleep and accepted it because acceptance required less oxygen. The stream proceeded with its appointed task. Shadows braided the ground into darker rope. A test had been set on the earth, graded by silence. Answers did not arrive. Time did, stacking seconds into a weight no one wanted to lift.
There are stretches of effort that feel like telling the ocean to change its mind. The ritual continued, morning into afternoon, weather into weather. Pip stabilized at almost, a number that could not decide if it belonged to 0 or 1. Rusty orbited the clearing like a dim star, same distance, same light. The bowl stayed upright and empty, a truce with no terms. Hannah learned the taxonomy of insect hums, the punctuation of squirrel alarms, the exact smile of sunlight on wet stone. Progress refused to name itself. Doubt spread its map under everything. The blanket faded by a shade so subtle only someone who had watched it every day could see it. This is what persistence looks like when it stops resembling heroism and starts wearing the face of work. Hunger is a language older than fear. On a morning as ordinary as a spoon, Rusty stepped from shadow and placed one paw before the other until the bowl filled her horizon. No eyes lifted to the human lake. No gesture acknowledged the sleeping thread at its center. She ate with slow exactness, accepting meat for what it was instead of what it meant. Each bite stitched a small repair along the torn seam of her body. Hannah kept the shape of a hill beside water. Pip dozed like a coin warming on a windowsill. The stream arranged a soft applause around stone. No triumph announced itself. No music swelled, but the mathematics moved, rebalancing the inequities between need and refusal. When she finished, Rusty withdrew without ceremony and left gravity behind her, looking slightly less cruel.
A day later, Rusty approached Pip during one of the kitten's sunlit sprawls, his limbs thrown carelessly across warmth, like punctuation after a sentence that finally made sense. She lowered her head and drew her tongue once across his crown, a rough stroke that sanded sleep into awareness. For a heartbeat, the clearing glowed with a primitive rightness. Then, Rusty's gaze lifted and intersected the human stillness. The soundless snarl was a sculpture of warning, lips carving negative space around teeth. It lasted the length of a blink and measured the distance between reclamation and trespass. She settled beside Pip, not touching again, a wall with a doorway only one could use. Hannah accepted the architecture. Ownership was not invited to this place. Function was, and survival, and something pointed toward repair. Strength returns in undramatic increments. Pip learned again how to pounce on a tassel's tremor, how to skid into laughter without sound, how to orchestrate grass into a chorus of small rattles as he tore through it with sketchbook legs. The blue blanket resumed its vocation as playground and shore. Rusty watched with a posture that looked like relaxation and measured like vigilance.
Hannah cataloged the improvements by habit and unlearned the temptation to celebrate too loudly inside her own chest. The clearing participated by being exactly itself: warm where the sun landed, cool where shadows pooled, indifferent where boundaries held. The kitten, once a paragraph barely written, became weather again, a pattern that touched everything and belonged to nothing but its own motion. Rains returned and wrote their temporary alphabets along the fence line, pooling into dark shapes that reflected sky and wire. In one of those mirrors, a boot print sat crisp and declarative, heel angled, tread biting clay. Another showed scuff and hesitation. The air near the metal tasted faintly of old smoke, a memory of fire without flame. Hannah followed the line outward and found no one, just wet grass pressed in a human geometry. The sanctuary's map expanded in her mind to include vectors that did not belong to deer. Rusty's ears tracked distant sound and then dismissed it. Pip discovered his reflection in a shallow puddle and attacked it with heroic determination. The fence did its job by being exactly where it had been yesterday. The world, however, had shifted an inch. At the edge, where public meets private, a small parcel of meat waited under casual leaves, the pink turned gray by exposure, wrongness braided with scent. Flies rehearsed ownership. Hannah knelt without touching, reading the shape of malice in the arrangement. A stick lifted the offering, and even at arm's length the odor told a chemical story her stomach already understood. The clearing did not discuss ethics. It presented variables. She bagged the evidence and bled calm back into the day, placing warning like a transparent dome over every step thereafter. Rusty moved in the thicket with soundless certainty, muscles answering only to math. Pip chased a grasshopper that refused to be a lesson. Somewhere, a vehicle idled, coughed, and quit. The sky turned its face, pretending to be simple.
Threats multiplied the way reflections do in cheap glass. Hannah measured the hours two ways now, by the pace of a kitten becoming a cat, and by the patience of men who leave poisoned flesh like punctuation. Rusty tightened her perimeter. Pip tested it and returned, learning without language where no meant safety. The fence shone under late light, peaceful as a lie. The stream kept its promises, one pebble at a time. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a dog barked twice and stopped. Fear did not spike, it spread, a fog that smoothed edges off choices and made every step a negotiation. Survival had become a duet, one voice furred and low, one human and silent, both set against a choir that preferred profit to pulse. Options collapsed politely. Extra staff stayed farther back. Patrols walked the fence at inconsistent hours, creating patterns that could not be mapped by eyes waiting in tree lines. Hannah adjusted rituals by millimeters, never enough to fracture trust, enough to make predators of every kind work harder for a mistake. Rusty accepted the recalibration with the same neutrality she granted weather. Pip noticed only games interrupted and resumed. The blue blanket, once a signal flare, had become geography, a safe continent that could not travel but could be returned to. Dusk drew long nails across the clearing and stopped short of pain. A moth struck the fence and found it uncompromising. The night collected itself, preparing to test all promises. Simplicity returned as a blade. Pip slept on Hannah's chest, heavier now, an anchor that chose where the body must remain. Rusty advanced until the world contained only three things aligned like beads on a string: the mother, the child, the human that had not moved. The space between claw and skin contracted into a single thought. Every leaf held still. the stream rehearsed silence. Time settled on the blanket as dust might, fine and inescapable. Hannah let breath shrink to a thread. The kitten's whiskers painted ghost lines across her throat each time he exhaled. Rusty shoulders wrote their equations aloud in muscle and shadow. Decisions aged a lifetime in a handful of seconds. The earth pressed its case upward. Hannah felt the ground's patience through cloth and bone, the argument of stone that living things must arrive at terms with weight. Sweat stung, cooled, returned. Her eyes softened without closing, refusing to participate in menace or plea. Pip dreamed an uncomplicated hunt, paws twitching, mouth shaping a syllable too small to become sound. Rusty leaned forward one breath, then another, closing distances that had not been designed for closure. The fence remembered boot prints and kept its logic anyway. A cloud moved and unstitched a small patch of shadow from the blanket's corner. No witness would have called it dramatic. Inside bodies, entire histories revised themselves to include surrender alongside survival.
Rusty made a choice that belonged to her species and to herself, not to any human story. She slid her flank along Hannah's forearm, a deliberate brush that transferred scent and command in equal measures. The contact was neither affection nor absolution. It was permission, temporary and contingent, a document signed by muscle and nerve. Hannah did not answer with touch. Pip's breathing deepened into that peaceful gravity reserved for the completely unafraid. The air altered texture, relief arriving without celebration. Rusty settled beside her kitten, posture open enough to pass for trust to the untrained and honest enough to be only endurance to those who knew. The blue blanket, wet at the edges, held shape and color as if it had waited for this exact alignment. There is grooming that scrubs and grooming that writes. Rusty bent and worked her tongue across Pip's fur in long strokes that smoothed panic back into the past. The kitten accepted the edit, rolling, offering, collapsing into softness again. Each pass affirmed a protocol older than fences, older than the calculations of men with poison. Hannah sat and did not enter the frame. The stream recovered its voice and made a small, delighted argument with a rock. A dragonfly stitched blue light over water, amused by nothing. The clearing felt larger, as if successful negotiations had purchased additional square footage from fear. The world, briefly, held inside it one perfect answer to a question asked in a barn weeks ago.
Hannah understood that restoration is not ownership, and rescue is not a claim. Rusty's eyes, brighter now, still held a continent where humans could not live. Pip would cross both countries as needed, fluent in a language that required no translation. The blue blanket dried in sun and remembered rain. The fence stopped pretending to be a metaphor and returned to being a structure needing inspection. Beyond the ridge, the engine note of a vehicle rose and fell, promising nothing, threatening everything. Gratitude arrived lean, carrying no ribbons, too honest for ceremony. The heart took inventory and released what was not owed. Work remained, like weather, like weeds, like hope. Morning laid gold along the clearing's seam, a seam stitched from weeks of breath, fur, and restraint. Pip chased a butterfly with seriousness beyond comedy, hind paws thudding, tail riding loops around consequence. Rusty occupied a low rock with the posture of a creature that had not forgiven the world, but had negotiated with it. Hannah sat outside the fence, the blue blanket folded across her knees, a small sea retired from service. The stream brightened its own smile. No announcements came, no endings sealed themselves. The clearing held a durable silence, the kind that does not erase scars, but refuses to let them speak as loudly. Somewhere far off, a truck changed gears and kept going. Inside the enclosure, life continued, not brave or tragic, simply alive, which is the bravest and least tragic thing.